that was just kind of, again, my encouragement for you where I came into that tonight. Okay, we're going to move on to the next bit, which is the institution of the Lord's Supper. You good for some more reading?
I am, brother.
All right, 7 through 13, Doug.
Here we go. Starting in verse 7. Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. So Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat it." They said to him, "Where will you have us to prepare it?" He said to them, "Behold, when you have entered the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house that he enters, and tell the master of the house, 'The teacher says to you, where is the guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' And he will show you a large upper room furnished. Prepare it there." And they went and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover.
Okay. Thank you, Doug. What's remarkable about the preparation for this meal?
He didn't know exactly where he was going to prepare it.
Okay, the disciples didn't know. Jesus knew, but the disciples didn't know. Okay, what else? Yes, Dale. Okay, you want to say that in the microphone so they can hear you online?
It was a blood sacrifice,
Okay.
the sacrifice of the lamb.
So the Passover meal included a blood sacrifice, okay? It included the sacrifice of a lamb, and then ultimately we know Jesus is that perfect Passover lamb, okay? What else was interesting about the preparation? How many of you think that the man carrying the jar of water was miraculous? And how many, okay, y'all raise your hands if you think it was miraculous, okay? How many of y'all think that Jesus, he's in Bethany a lot, staying there, going into Jerusalem. This isn't his first time in Jerusalem. He was going from the temple to the Mount of Olives. We read that last week. Every day, teaching in the temple courts every day, sleeping on the Mount of Olives every night. So he just went and he made the preparations in advance, and it wasn't quote unquote miraculous because Jesus had already taken care of it. How many are in that camp? Okay, you're in that camp. We don't know the answer to that. Is it possible that Jesus somehow, moved in such a way that caused this man to carry water on this particular day and have a room that was perfectly possible but it's also possible that he was going to and from the temple every day and he knew that this was going to be needed and he went and made preparations in advance.
Our God said that women usually carry the water.
Okay, and Mr. Cutts just made an important point. One of the things that would have been unusual about this meal preparation is that this guy would have stuck out in the crowd, because men usually didn't carry the water. So when Peter and John went to take care of this preparation that Jesus asked them to do, they would have been able to spot that guy carrying water, because that would have been something a little bit different. Yeah, Randy?
When the Roman soldiers stood before Christ and told him, all you do is say the word.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Right. So Randy makes the point of something we studied earlier in Luke, where the Roman soldiers said, I'm a man who commands many people. You are somebody in charge as well. I appreciate that. All you have to do is say the word. So he does have the ability to do that. We're not given the answer, but either one is possible. But it is a remarkable meal preparation nonetheless. It is certainly something that was intentional. It should remind you of something we studied a few weeks ago, which would have been a week prior to this, when the disciples were sent to find a donkey, okay? And all those preparations had been made in advance. So it should remind us of what we call Palm Sunday, or the triumphal entry, and the fact that Jesus, in one way or another, had made that preparation possible for him to ride in on the donkey of peace, as opposed to the war horse of war. So it should remind us of that. It also, for some reason, and again, I don't want to stretch connections between the Old Testament and New Testament too much, but there's something in there that reminds me of the servant being sent to find Rebekah as Isaac's son, because, the servant the indication was somebody's going to come, carrying water, ask her to water your camels, and that's how you're going to know that this is the woman. So there's something in that I can't get my mind around, but my mind keeps going too for some reason. But here's the application, I think, for us. Are we as confident as Peter and John were about the preparations made for us? You don't see in the text that Peter and John said that they didn't ask any questions. Seems like they should have. I mean, there's 1 million people, or maybe more than that, Mark, I don't know, at least 1 million people in Jerusalem. It's a crowded time of the year. Everybody's there for the feast. Every room, everything's taken probably by now. They didn't ask any questions. They just got to work. If that meant that they had to get the lamb ready, go find a lamb, find bitter herbs, the other elements, unleavened bread, the things that they just went to work. They trusted the preparations would be true. Are we as trusting in that? What do you think? And the reason I ask that is because if we were in the Gospel of John instead of the Gospel of Luke, right here in the Gospel of John, right as John is recounting his account of the institution of the Lord's Supper, just a chapter later, right before we get to the chapter about the vine and the branches, we get this text. The text that we oftentimes we read at memorial services and things like that. But this text about the preparation that a lot of us know pretty well. Some of us might not, but many of us have heard this, if at least at a funeral. But this is right there in John's Gospel, pretty close to the Lord's Supper. And he says, "Do not let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it weren't so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you may also be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going." And so if there's nothing else that we can take out of those few verses, 7 through 13, of Luke chapter 22, one of the things I think maybe we can take away is Jesus makes preparations. He does things intentionally. Remember, if we go back to, I think it was Luke chapter 9, verse 51, that turning point that we had when we began the journey to Jerusalem, it says He set His face on Jerusalem. Everything He did going to that cross was intentional. It wasn't accidental. He knew where He was going. He knew what the mission was. And He made the preparation for the donkey on the Palm Sunday. He made the preparation for the Passover meal. And He has made a preparation for us. And so we should be able to count on that. And I think that seeing some of this other intentionality about Jesus can be encouraging to us. It's not accidental. He's made those intentional preparations. All right, Doug, let's move on to verses 14 through 18. Actually, you're going to have to read a lot. It's 14 through 23. It's 2 slides. I'll change when you get to verse 19.
You're the man, Jeff. Thank you. And when the hour came, He reclined at the table, and the apostles with Him. And He said to them, "I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God." And He took a cup, and when He had given thanks, He said, "Take this and divide it among you. For I tell you that from now on I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes." And then He took the bread, and when He had given thanks, He broke it, and He gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And likewise, the cup, after they had eaten, saying, this cup has been poured out for you, is the new covenant in my blood. But behold, the hand of him who betrays me is with me on the table. For the Son of Man goes as it has been determined. But woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. And they began to question one another. Which of them could it be who was going to do this?
Okay, thank you, Doug. Again, a passage that many are familiar with. We take communion here at Vaughn Park every first day of the week, and a lot of times, this passage or a similar passage is what we read during that time when we remember the body and blood of Jesus. I want us to rewind a little bit and think about Luke's Gospel. What role has the table played, or where have we seen the table come into play in Luke's Gospel thus far? Now, I know not all of you have been able to be in every class since we started this, in September or wherever it was, way back some time ago. We started a long time ago in Luke chapter 1. But where are some table scenes that y'all remember in Luke? Just shout it out. Have there been any tables in Luke?
I can't remember if he overturned the tables in Luke.
Okay. Casting out the money chambers, overturning the tables. I don't have that in my notes, but he certainly, yeah, okay. What else? Tables.
The woman who anointed his feet.
Okay. Yeah, he was at the woman who anointed Jesus' feet. Jesus is at the home of a Pharisee. He's reclining at the table. Remember, we talked about in that time, you didn't sit in a chair. You probably leaned on one arm and your feet were stretched out behind you, and a woman came up behind Jesus and anointed him, anointed his feet. We also talked about the fact that in those days it wasn't unusual if somebody had a dinner guest, other people could come and look on from afar. That seems like a weird custom to me. So it wouldn't have been unusual that she would have been there, but she started anointing Jesus' feet. Anything else? Yes, Doug?
Zacchaeus.
Okay, I'm going to your house today.
That's right.
Zacchaeus, okay. He eats with the tax collector, Zacchaeus, or at least he goes to his house. Yep, okay. What else? Here's my list that I just threw together quickly. This might not be all-encompassing, but in chapter 5, Jesus eats with Levi. We know him as Matthew, who was a tax collector. He eats with Matthew and other tax collectors and sinners, as his critics say. You eat with tax collectors and sinners. Chapter 7, Summer made this one is the one that Summer mentioned. He's anointed by a sinful woman while at the Pharisees' table. Then chapter 11, he's at another different Pharisee's table. He's invited to dinner by another Pharisee, and this is where he pronounces the woes on the Pharisees. Chapter 12, he tells about the master serving the watchful servants. Chapter 14 is the parable of two parables. The parable about the places of honor, I guess. Don't take the place of honor because somebody more important might come in after you and then you'll have to give up your seat. Then the parable about the banquet, the great banquet that's prepared, and people don't come when they receive the, what it's called, did you get now? Save the date. They get to save the date, but then when it's time for the banquet, they don't come. And so Master sends out his servants, get people from the hedgerows and wherever to come in, fill my table. And then those that wanted to come, I'm confusing parables. This is the banquet. This is the banquet and excuses parable, where somebody says, "Oh, I have to do this. I have to do that." Lazarus longed for the scraps from the rich man's table in chapter 16. There's a lot of things in Luke about the table. Lots of things in Luke. Y'all would do better putting that list together than me, obviously. What were the common themes? Just in the ones that I went through, what are some of the common themes about the table?
It was not what everybody
not what everybody else would do. Yeah,
He picked people that were unusual or
yeah. He picked people, Charlie said, that were unusual. He didn't eat with the folks that people would have expected him to eat with. Okay? What else? What are other themes? Yeah, themes of table throughout the whole book.
Oh, about the table.
Yeah, about the table.
I think connected to that is his connection in this gospel. We've talked about this often, about opening the aperture wider instead of just being for the Jews, for the Gentiles.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a big thematic theme over the entire book. But I think it applies also to the table that we're
Yeah,
talking
absolutely. Kind of what Charlie was saying. People that you wouldn't expect. It's so here's the themes that I take away from. If you look at every table reference in Luke, I think that the themes are acceptance. Again, that this is that the good news is not just for the Jews, but for the Gentiles as well. Humility. He encourages humility. Don't seek the seat of honor at the table. That is a recurring theme. Service. He talks about the master actually serving those that are at the table. There's a lot of themes of watchfulness in Luke, and certainly in a lot of the table situations, there's the theme of watchfulness. Be ready. Be ready for when that banquet's coming. You got to save the date. Be ready. Don't be caught making excuses about other things that you're going to do. And compassion. Luke is pretty a major theme throughout Luke, but particularly about the table is compassion. So if we look at what Jesus actually said in this long passage that Doug just read, if you look at the words that Jesus actually said, His key messages as He was instituting the Lord's Supper in Luke's account, and again, if you really want to do a deep dive on the Lord's Supper, you almost need to take all the Gospels and put them side by side and read them together, because there's few little details here and there that are going to make that whole picture even richer for you. We just don't have time to quite do that tonight. It would take a whole class just to do that. And I probably wouldn't do it as well as Brother Mark or some of the other teachers, but he says that he was eager to eat with the disciples. And if you remember from Mark's sermon on Sunday, if you were there, he said, when he was covering this chapter, he said that eagerness, this would not have been this past Sunday, but the Sunday before, that word eager is not just eager. It's like he really, that's what Tim said, he really wanted to eat this meal. So he was very eager. He was passionate about that. And then the other things that he says is that there's another banquet coming. There's going to be a bigger banquet. I'm not going to eat this with you again, but there is a bigger banquet coming. He talks about the preparation for His death and departure. In His own words, He says, "Remember my body." Okay? And then He says, "This is my blood. This is the blood of the new covenant." I put Jeremiah 31 there. We're not going to turn to it tonight, but Jeremiah prophesies of the new covenant. He talks about the betrayal that's coming, and then he says all of that, kind of summarizes that by saying, but the destiny will be fulfilled. He says, for the Son of Man goes as it has been determined. That's that destiny piece. The Son of Man goes as it has been determined. So again, nothing was accidental. Again, Jesus, since 951, His face was set on Jerusalem. He knew where He was going, and this was the destiny that was going to be fulfilled. I don't want to just fly through this, even though I have a little bit, but many of y'all have studied in depth the institution of the Lord's Supper. We talk about it a lot. We don't want it to ever get rote and just passé, right? We don't want it to be something that we just kind of gloss over every Sunday and move on. Any other thoughts about this before we pass by it tonight? Other things that y'all have learned over the years or studied? Questions that you have? Because if you have good questions, Roxy can answer them for you. Maybe Brother Dale?
even though it was predicted, even though it was predicted that all these things were going to take place, even before any of these men were chosen, he already knew about them. He already knew. So it's, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if it was just, I mean, probably before they were born, he knew. I don't know. It's just been something I've wondered about.
You know, that's a mind-boggling thought, isn't it? That we, you know, and y'all, if y'all been in my classes before, this is one me and Randy had the same fascination, and you know, because we think in a linear manner, right? We think about our life from birth to death, and it's a line, and we can't see if the end of the line is at Dale. Well, that's a scary thought. The end of my lifeline is at Dale. If the end of my line is Dale, if I'm down at that line level, I can't see that far. I can't see, but God's up here. He's looking at the line from up here. And that's something that baffles our imagination. Okay, we're going to hit a few more themes in this.
One thing, Jeff?
Yes, Doug.
You had asked, brother, so I'm going to...
I did ask.
You did.
Shame on me.
Shame on you. So one of the things that the word that stuck out to me as I was reading this for the 20 billionth time, I guess, was the word fulfillment. You know, and how eager he was to have this meal with them. This was, and I was trying to make a kind of a picture, kind of analogy. You know, I do that a lot, right? So I was thinking that this is like a spark. This is like a candle. This is just a little tiny flame that he's having this meal with them. But if you think about the future, when he gets to eat this meal with them again, that's not going to be on earth. That's going to be
in a new heaven and
in a new heaven and earth. And it's probably not going to be with these 12 guys. It's going to be with 12 gazillion people. It's going to be a dazzling light. It's going to be fantastic. So that whole fulfillment thing just made me think about the eternity of it all.
You pumped me up, Doug. Thank you. Okay, we're going to, right here, we're not going to, I'm not going to make Doug, he was so fired up, I don't want to make him read again. We're not going to read verses 24 through 30, but a dispute broke out about who was going to be the greatest. And this is where Jesus really drives home how we began the lesson tonight. That this is about, he came to serve. And his expectation for the disciples is to serve. And so the expectation for all of us as Christians, to some extent, is to serve. And we don't really have time to fully explore this question in the time that we have left. But what I'm going to encourage you to do is go to the end of Ephesians chapter 5, go into Ephesians chapter 6, because when we look at roles of people that are supposed to be expected to be kind of in a commanding role, a husband versus a wife, a master versus an indentured servant, those kinds of things, we see, we have certain expectations about who's to serve and who's not to serve. What I want you to take note of in Ephesians chapter 5 and 6 is that every time that there is an instruction given to who we think is in the lower position, fathers and sons, that's the other one. Every time you see the instruction to whoever we would normally, human nature would think is in the lower position, comes right around and there is an instruction for who is in the expected higher position. And the standard is just as high. In fact, if not higher, for the husband as it is for the wife, for the master as it is for the servant, to the father as it is to the son. And then I would also refer you to 1 Peter chapter 5, because even within the church, in 1 Peter chapter 5, it talks about the role of elders. And how is that described? It's described as a role of servant, right? Not that the elders would lord over you, but that they would serve. And so that idea of service is drilled in over and over and over again. Verses 31 through 34, 31 through 34 is when Jesus says, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat. Okay? Sift you like wheat. And and I'm going to do what? What does Jesus say? He says that, and then he says, so I have told Satan he can't do it. I have told Satan he can't sift you like wheat. I have put Satan in timeout, and he is not going to sift you like wheat. Is that what he said? He said, Peter, I'm going to do what? But I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray that your faith will not fail. And so that's how Jesus responds to Satan's request. He says, I'm going to pray that your faith will not fail you. Why was Peter being sifted? Why do you think Peter was being sifted? Because he was vulnerable? Maybe. He was definitely vulnerable. Why, Dale? Shout it out. Okay, so maybe he had some pride. He was vulnerable. He had pride. Why was he being sifted? What do you do when you sift? What do you do when you sift? You separate, okay? Go buy you some real cornmeal, okay? Not the stuff, not Martha White, but go buy some real whole ground cornmeal. And if you make your cornbread out of that, it's going to be crunchy if you don't sift it, because you got to sift that bran, that husk out of it, right? The reason Peter was being sifted is Peter had to be refined. He had to be refined. He had a big role ahead of him. Jesus prayed for him. And then he says, and when you turn, and when you return, when you turn back, encourage your brothers. And what did he do? That's what he did. He encouraged the rest of them. He ended up being the guy that preached on Pentecost. 3,000 people became Christians. So Peter had a big role. Peter was sifted because he needed to be refined. Guess what? So do we. How are you being sifted? This is where I should have left a big blank for you to fill in your own thing. How are you being sifted right now? Are you being sifted by sickness? Are you being sifted with grief? Are you being sifted by frustration about the state of world affairs? What's sifting you right now? And then, what will you do when you've turned again? Jesus says, Peter, but I know you're going to come out of this. He basically says, I know you're going to turn out of this. And when you turn again, encourage your brothers. So, we've all been sifted in our lives with different things, right? We've been sifted by disease. We've been sifted by divorce or financial hardship or a sick child or loss of somebody that we love. We've been sifted in different ways. And that can refine us so that we can turn again and do something constructive with that. The last part of the chapter, and again, I encourage you to read the whole chapter, but the last part of the chapter is a bit of a contrast from earlier when Jesus sends out His disciples earlier in Luke. He says, don't take anything with you. We're going to provide what you need. And if you encounter people that are not hospitable to you, that are not welcoming to you, that won't hear what you say, shake the dust of that town off of you, head on down the road. But in this situation, He gives them a different instruction. He says, when I sent you out before, I sent you without all that stuff. But now, verse 36, if you don't have a money bag, take it. Likewise with a knapsack. If you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. Now, Tim has preached on this some, and he makes a point about the two swords. I think the two swords is interesting as well. But I think the overarching idea is, why is this important? Well, Jesus says, He says, for it is written about me, and it has fulfillment. Again, Doug's word. He says, He was numbered with the transgressors, for what is written about me has its fulfillment. He was numbered with the transgressors. Jesus was numbered with the transgressors. Guess what's going to happen to those people that are the closest followers to Him? They're going to be numbered with the transgressors. They're going to become America's most wanted. They're going to be like those 55 men that signed a Declaration of Independence, right? They are signing their own death warrant, right? That's what these 11 now are doing. And so He says, you got to be prepared now. You're going out into a different situation. So the question then would be for us, we say we wanted, what would Jesus do? That was thing on your, Mr. Cutts has a great story about a what would Jesus do bracelet. Y'all ask him after class. But a lot of us wore those. We want to be like Jesus, but are we prepared to be treated like Jesus? That's what the disciples were called to do. So that's just a parting thought for you. Okay, tonight's song is really kind of almost like a devotional chorus. We used to sing it here at Vaughn Park. I wouldn't pull something on you that we didn't sing. And as I told Brother Mark, it's fairly new, but it's in the old book, what we used to call the old book. So that makes it okay. But it's this "Lord, Make Me a Servant" song. We're going to sing it through twice. Any final comments before we depart with this sweet little song? All right. Well, y'all, Mark said he didn't know if he remembered it, but he can read notes, so he's got it for us. But y'all help him out. Sing loud. Be a servant, Lord, make me like you. For you are a servant, make me one too. Lord, make me a servant, do what you must do. To make me a servant, make me like you. One more time. Lord, make me a servant, Lord, make me like you. For you are a servant, make me one too. Lord, make me a servant, do what you must do. To make me a servant, make me like you. Thank you. God bless you. Have a good rest of your week.